now, Tracy, would you like to start?
Sure. Thanks, Julia. So this is Unscripted, Teaching Through Conversation. My name is Tracy Shields. It's very nice to see everyone. As I was just telling Amy, this is my dream come true because instead of sitting in a boring old conference hall, I get to see everybody in their living room. I wear many hats. First and foremost, I consider myself a writer. I'm a published author and creator of American Uproot. It's a travel series that follows expatriates and immigrants through their new countries of residence. I graduated from a graduate student, and I volunteered as a tutor. Oops, I'm going to actually mute everyone here. Give me 1 second.
I will do it for you, Tracy.
Yeah, could you please mute everybody? I always feel like I have to say no offense to the person that I just muted. And I've been teaching at Literacy, or I should say I've been tutoring at Literacy, New Jersey for a couple years on and off. I live in both New Jersey and Madrid. In fact, I'm in Madrid now, and every time anybody says good morning, I'm like, no, it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So it's not morning for me. I'm ready to get going after this and go out partying at night. I hope my Wi-Fi holds out while I'm here, but I'm very excited to be here. I created this unscripted workshop because I'm sure everybody kind of will recognize this story. As soon as the pandemic hit, I immediately called Rebecca, who's the director of the Burlington County Literacy, New Jersey, and I said, "What can I do to help?" I remember thinking to myself, all of those students that were meeting at libraries could no longer meet in person anymore. What could I do? And she said, well, there's a conversation class that has just completely been canceled. How would you like to do it on Zoom? Do you even know how to use Zoom? I was like, I will try to figure it out. And that's exactly what happened. I created a conversation class, basically. I'm a lifelong student of Spanish, and I was working on the Verbling platform. And so it was a very easy transition for me. And not only that, but I figured, let's forget the grammar. They've got teachers for that, and whatever they're learning in their grammar classes, they could come and we'll just chit chat. And my very first class was completely unscripted, and that's why it's called that. However, this is anything but an unscripted class if you ever do teach conversation. Conversation classes for me is not about teaching, it's about moderating. It's a place where students can relax, chat about current events, give their opinion, and enjoy casual conversation. Excuse me. I like to teach them the term chew the fat. So that's what we do. And like I said, I call this class unscripted, but it's anything but that. As a teacher, tutor, host, or moderator, you always need to be prepared, and that's exactly what this workshop is about, how to prepare what appears as a natural conversation. So let me see. So I want to share with you the agenda. I'm not sure if you guys have the agenda, but I do have an agenda today. And I'm going to quickly share that with you. So the first part of this presentation is about the Zoom platform. I am having difficulty seeing all of you at once, but I will in a minute, not right now, ask you how many people are familiar and like comfortable with Zoom. I'm not going to get a lot into Zoom because it's been taught before, and by a year and a half into the pandemic, we should probably be pretty good at that point. But we'll just go over a few of the conversation tools that I use in the Zoom platform. I'd like to then go to the 6 structures for teaching within a casual conversation setting. I want to quickly add a few of the rules of a conversation monitor. moderator. We're going to do one mock debate and then I'm going to share some of the resources that I typically use, and then we'll save questions and answers for later. Okay. And again, all of the resources that I share with you will be available at the end of this chat, at the end of this workshop. Okay. So let's first start with Zoom, the very beginning, and again, let me see if I'm gonna actually widen my screen here, and if you can just raise your hand, how many people are comfortable now with the Zoom platform or Skype or whatever you're using? Yeah. So hold on, I have to go to page 2. Just keep your hands up. That's great. Okay, so almost everybody is. All right, so I'm not going to be discussing any of the technical terms about Zoom because you're already all pros. That's a good thing. Instead, what I wanted to discuss is when I first started, I started with the speaker mode, and I wanted to see who was speaking first. So the very first thing about the conversation class in Zoom really means that you are you're not so much, it's not so much about the speaker, it's about the group. And so I recommend that everyone go to viewing gallery mode, gallery mode, so I can see everybody. And I have no idea how many people are in this class today, but usually in a conversation class, it can be anywhere from 3 to 20 people, and I can typically see everyone. So gallery mode really helps. The second feature that I really depend upon is the chat feature. And I'm sure we all recognize that the chat feature is important. I specifically ask my students not to send me private messages. I instead use the chat feature to share words. I share documents, I share links, and they can save it for the future, or you can see it. You can actually create the account settings and save it for the future, or they can save it for the future. If not, you can always send the chat after class, but usually I save chat for all of the vocabulary that we're working on within the conversation. The shared screen, of course, is a big one. That is where I present all my materials. And I typically do a lot of cartoons. I will share my lesson plans with them, and anything else, any links or any readings that we happen to be doing to help in the class. The whiteboard, in case I ever want to go back to grammar, some kind of grammar lesson within the conversation class, I'll use the whiteboard. But I typically stay away from grammar just because, again, and I'm going to get into this in a bit, the conversation is the main goal, and that's what these students are really there for. And I don't want them to feel like they have to break out a pen and paper to learn a lesson. The other feature that I love to use is muting. As natural as you would think that a conversation class could be, if you just kept everybody on, you are up against problems. People do want to talk over other students. And so taking turns is a big must do. As the moderator, you really need to be able to call on your students to speak, as opposed to having them just, okay, what are we going to talk about today? That's really not the structure that you want to go for. And it would make for a very chaotic conversation class. So mute everyone, and then when you call on somebody, they can turn off their mute. The rule of conversation class: speak, listen, respond. And that typically works for me. The actual lesson plans are built on the structure that you use for that day. And that's what your class is going to depend on. And your class can be an hour, it can be 2 hours. I've taught both, and I will give you examples of both. But for now, we're going to just be, everything that I'm talking about today is going to be based on an hour-long conversation class. So moving along to part 2, there are 6 structures for teaching within a casual conversation setting. When I first started conversation class, I basically started off with questions and answers. And I think that's kind of where we all go to the default, you know, how are you today? What's your answer? And you just sit there and wait. But when you are trying to moderate a class and you want it to run really smoothly, and you don't want to have a lot of quiet time, you want to have more of a casual, relaxed back and forth, you need to start coming up with more creative ideas and ways in which your class can share information verbally. So that's when I started to do a little bit more research into pragmatics, which is the useful real-life use of language. It is not grammar. And I planned my lessons 1 hour or 2 hours according to 1 hour or 2 hours according to what class I was teaching or moderating. And then I came up with these 6 creative structures, and there's probably more. If anybody has any resources or any recommendations for me, I would love to know more, but these are the 6 that I have been using. And let's go through them one by one, and then I'm going to share my lesson plan afterwards. So one of the very first structures that I use when teaching. Actually, let me step back for a minute and say that when you get into a conversation class, it's best to just kind of imagine how many students you have. So let's just pretend we've got 10 students, 5 and 5. You're all in the gallery view, and you want to talk about something today. So that's what these structures are. They're ways in which you can share information with your students. So starting off with number 1, the debate structure. It is exactly what we would know it in English. It is the, the typical argument, the logical argument for and against something. So when I would come into a conversation class, I would usually start off by saying, hi, how is everybody? Of course, at that point, you unmute everyone, let everybody, say hello, what have they been doing? And then we move on to the structure. And so today we're going to do debate. And, the debate structure could be on absolutely anything. I'm going to give you the resources for a great page. It's called, I want to say, procon.org. And we're going to do the debate a little bit later. But basically, you come up with a debate. So, for example, one of the ones that I did in my class was, should we take down historical statues? And of course, everybody has an opinion on this. Trying not to keep it political or trying to avoid politics, people still have opinions. So what you do is you give them pro ideas. Well, you should take down a statue because it doesn't apply to the mentality or the culture of the people in existence today. Well, you shouldn't take it down because it represents our history and we never want to forget our history. So in the procon.org website, it actually gives you pros and cons, and each of your students will read one or the other. And then during the debate, you select your children, pardon me. I also have grandchildren that I teach. Your students, you give them either a con or a pro. They can either choose or you can assign something like that. And then what they do is you give them rules, and they have 1 minute to present an argument for or against. You can guide students on tone, style, clarity, and content. For example, if they're pro taking down a statue, make sure they understand that in English, in order to argue something, you want to have a assured tone. And you can choose a style. All these things are great teaching tools for how they present their opinion or their argument for something. The number two is the storytelling structure, and storytelling structure comes a little bit more freely to a lot of ESL students because they have stories in their head. Everybody's a storyteller. However, getting those stories out can be very difficult. So as the moderator of a storytelling structure, what you want to do is you want to teach them how to tell a story. So for example, this is a totally different lesson plan, and this is a totally different day. Tell me about a time when you were very sad as a child. Okay, so you're requesting a story from them, and you want them to be able to tell you about a moment in time where they had an experience. So easier said than done, right? I always think of when I do it in Spanish, and I get the verb tenses all wrong. I get the adjectives all wrong. Everything's off, and I have to do everything in either present tense or something like that. Whatever tense they're comfortable with, or whatever level you're teaching to, make sure they understand that present tense stories are absolutely fine. You know, I go to the store. I see shoes. I like shoes. I buy shoes. That's a story. And that is perfectly acceptable for the telling of a story. Where conversation comes in and where you can help to guide them is that you can impose upon them, either through homework that they have to practice the night before or the week before, the plot and how to tell that story. So for example, I want a story about when you were 5 years old and a time when you were sad. You want to give me the introduction, the rising action, the climax, the falling action, and the resolution. Now, of course, you can make this a lot simpler. I want an introduction, I want a climax, and I want a resolution. Okay. For example, and you can also, apply the past progressive to this, to this lesson, if you want to try to work in grammar. But you can give them examples. When I was young, I went to the beach. There's your intro. And while I was walking close to the water, I saw a child drowning. There's your rising action. I ran to the lifeguard and screamed for him to help. He jumped in the water and dragged the boy out of the water to save him. There's your climax. I breathed a heavy sigh of relief and I wasn't sad anymore. There's your falling action. I waved goodbye to the boy and everything was good. Okay, so these are the kinds of structures that you can try to elicit as they're communicating. The other thing that you want to do with storytelling, the other part of storytelling structure that you want to moderate is you want to be able to prompt them. So I can recall one of my students had a story about when he was young and he was playing soccer. And he started off by saying, I was 15, I played soccer, and I wasn't good. I wasn't good at it. So I don't play anymore. And I'm like, okay, so you have to, as the moderator, start prompting. There's far more to this story, but your student is hesitating and they are not able to come up with the vocabulary, or they're translating in their head. So you want to rely on things like setting. Well, what was the setting? How old were you? What was the environment? Were your parents angry that you weren't good at soccer? What was the space? What time was it? What time of year was it? These are all ways in which you can try to draw out more of the story. Okay. The next structure is the Q&A structure. And to me, this, of course, is my favorite. It's the simplest. It's best for beginners. It's good for intermediate students. How was your day? It basically is what it was good. If you want to evolve a little bit more from that, and you want to rely more on, or I should say, if you're not a communicator yourself and you want to learn how to draw out students with the questions and answers, rely on the 5 W's: who, what, where, when, why. And this is how you can drag out more information on questions and answers. Question: what is your favorite hobby? We have a class sometimes devoted completely to, people's hobbies. And inevitably it's, sewing, travel, it's just one word. And in conversation, that's very limiting. So again, you want to try to draw them out and get them to talk a little bit more. So you avoid yes and no questions, and you rely on the 5 W's. And then you can also, sneak in there the conditional. What would you do if you could travel to Mars? Or would you travel to Mars if if it were possible? Things like that. The other really good structure with Q&A is it doesn't have to come from you, the teacher, or the moderator. I keep saying moderator because you're not teaching, you're moderating, or you're hosting. So you can come up with questions, or the students can come up with questions, and they can ask other students. And that is probably the absolute best, because then you can just sit back and watch the magic. And one of the best things to do is to give them homework. And I mentioned that a little bit later as a prerequisite. Give them the homework, say, listen, next class, we're doing question and answers. I want you to come up with 3 questions. You can ask them to 3 different students, or you can ask them to 1 specific student. You cannot make rules. You cannot use yes and no questions or avoid yes and no questions. And don't use my examples, and no 1-word answers. And of course, that's always fun. And that really gets the students to know each other. And it also draws out a lot of humor and inevitably more conversation, which is exactly what you want. Sometimes what happens when this structure is used, when you allow the students to choose other students, they pick their friends, or they pick people that they know are stronger speakers. And so as a moderator, you want to try to make sure that they're rotating. That's something to look out for. The 4th is description structure. And you want to use description structure is just what it says. It's you're using visual props. What do you see? You're giving them a cartoon. You are giving them a photo where they are asked to describe what they see. And one of the fascinating things about language and the fascinating things about culture is that they're all going to have such different responses. I had a picture once of a man riding a horse, and it looked like they were going off a cliff. You had one person say that they were a cowboy. Another person said that they were, killing themselves. Another person said that they were running away from something. So it doesn't really matter what the picture is about. What matters is the language, that they're applying what they're thinking, and it's being vocalized. One of the things that I want to share with you is a total fail on my part, and I think it's really good to show failures. I used it on a description structure class, and it was around Easter time. And I typically give cartoons because my students, and I'm sure your students, they have fabulous senses of humor, and they really get a lot of the jokes that I tell them and the jokes that I will show them. But this one was a complete fail. Well, one of them worked and one of them didn't. And I want to show you the difference so that maybe you can detect what I wasn't able to detect again. Maybe it'll be fun to see your class kind of just scratch their head and go, I have no idea what this is. Or it can prompt you to figure out why they didn't understand it and maybe teach a little bit more on that. So let me show you the two cartoons. Give me 1 second. That's not it. I've got one of them up here. I'm not sure I can share both of these at the same time, so I'm going to share the first one. So can everybody see this? And basically, this comes up, and it's I'm gonna unmute Julia. Julia, can you unmute to just agree with me here?
Yes.
Thanks. So you can see this.
Yes.
It's a and I would basically ask my class, so what do you see? And they take turns telling what they see. And of course, they'll say, it looks like 2 rabbits or 2 bunnies, and they're speaking. And one bunny has, again, I'm not speaking, they are. You want them to try to figure out, one bunny has no ears. One bunny is male, one bunny is female. It looks like maybe they're married, right? She's got little hearts on her apron, and she's at the sink. This is probably not appropriate for today's younger generation. Nevertheless, it's funny. So then I asked one to read, and they say, "I swear, honey, you never hear a word I say." And you get, huh? So of course, the little male or husband bunny doesn't hear what the wife bunny says, but why doesn't he understand? Why doesn't he hear? And of course, this is the question that you want to ask your class. Why doesn't this bunny hear? So the cultural teaching tool here is obvious to us. It's because during the holiday of Easter, little children who get chocolate bunnies in their basket bite off the ears. So this poor little bunny has suffered. I'm not going to tell you, by the way, which one they understood and which one they didn't. So that was number 1. I'm going to now share the second one. And Julia, can you see that one? Is everybody good with that one?
Yes.
So the second one was this, and the description was very important because, of course, we're in Easter, and in America, many Christians and non-Christians, they paint eggs. So we have what looks like 3 female eggs here. And we've got 2 that are colored a solid color. One's pink, it looks, one's blue. And then we have one very elaborately dressed. Now the pink and the blue look like they might be friends. And the other one is sitting at the bar alone. And of course, they say, check out the dye job on her. And the other one says, tramp. This, to me, was the funnier of the 2. And so I really tried hard to explain, that, I tried to explain dye job. I tried to explain the ways in which we dye our eggs. Sometimes they're plain, sometimes they're more elaborate. And then I try to explain tramp. And that's probably what absolutely failed. I guess I gave it away. That was the cartoon that failed. They thought the bunny ears was hilarious, but when I taught the other one, the dye job one, they like literally completely blank. They were like, okay, like this was not coming through. So either I failed to describe the cartoon, or we all kind of failed when it came to the culture of what it means, and the layer upon layer upon layer of meaning to certain things. So you do want to watch out for something like that. You want to watch out for how many layers underneath some meanings can be. Speaking and listening structure. It really should be listening structure, because I mean, obviously we're speaking in every single one of these structures. But listening structure is a very, very important class to have. I try to have it at least once a month, or I try to work it in to almost every class. Again, I go back to learning Spanish. I can speak Spanish much better than I can listen. No, wait, I can listen much better than I can speak. Actually, the truth is, sometimes you listen better and sometimes you speak better. So you have to constantly be practicing those two skills. And speaking and listening is phenomenal, a phenomenal skill to have for basic learners, intermediate, and advanced, especially advanced. More so than ever, they also have the ability to try to listen and understand themselves. It's very easy, or I should say it's easier, to understand a native speaker than it is to understand someone that's also learning the language. So I typically, when I do the listening structure, what I end up doing is, if I have a, I guess I could say weaker student, or a student that needs a little bit more help with pronunciation, there, I put a story, or we do question and answer structure. We do storytelling structure. And then, so I have student A from, say, Vietnam tell a story about when she was at the university. And I, she gives details. And so student B, who's from Turkey, is trying to understand and pull out details. And then it's my job as the moderator to say, okay, what did you hear? What did the student from Vietnam say? And if there is a lot of pronunciation errors, I tend to either rely on my chat and I will type in some of the words, or I'll pause the conversation and I'll say in English, or a little bit clearer, so you went to the university, you studied bioengineering, you did blah, blah, blah. And I repeat the same story if I notice that there's a little bit of struggle. And then it's reversed, of course. You want all of your students to have a chance to do that. Details are very, very important. So your student can speak, but remind them to use as many adjectives, as many details as possible. And the students who are listening, remind them that it's okay to write down what you hear. You don't have to memorize. I'm 53 years old. My God, if I could walk around with a notebook all day long, I'd probably have a great memory. So relying on writing things down is perfectly fine. You want to make sure that speaking and listening, they're getting the general gist of the conversation. And that I think is important to them. If they get more details, that's great. And then of course, at the very end of one exchange, or at the end of every exchange, I will then summarize in English. I'll speak slower, and so that more people can understand what was said. The last one is my absolute favorite, and it's called free discuss. I called it free discussion. It's basically hot topics, what's in the news, opinions, and this kind of free discussion is a conversation moderator's dream come true. Because what happens is maybe something in the news hits and it's big, and the students come to class and you have a lesson planned on, the phases of the moon. And the night before was, like in I'm going to give you an example. The night before one of my classes was the Capitol insurrection, and of course the students came the very next day, and my first question to them was, "Do you want to talk about this?" And that is exactly how I started the class. And it lasted for an hour and a half, and there was no talking about the moons. So as a conversation moderator, you have to be willing to just allow that freedom of free discussion on what's in current events. And usually what happens when something like this pops up in the news, or there's something very pressing that we all want to talk about, is that the natural conversation flows wonderfully. All you really have to do is just let it happen. Do you want to talk about this? And somebody will always say, what happened? So they're going to want an answer. And again, the job of the moderator is not to answer that question. It's to let another one of your students answer that question. So what did happen? Who has an answer for that? Who can explain what they saw? And then who saw something else? So it just goes around like that. But basically, a story like that is a wonderful teaching tool, and it's also a way that the class, the students, and the moderator are bonding over something big. And I really like the free discussions. They don't happen very often. I think in the very beginning, we started talking about the pandemic a lot. Like, what are we going to do now? What is this? It's locked down again. Like everybody was just, and then finally you just noticed this sense of, please, I don't want to talk about the pandemic anymore. I don't want to talk about COVID anymore. I reserve the big news for only when it happens. I mean, like, who decides what's big news? But a great way to start every conversation class is there anything in the news that's bothering you? Is there anything in the, that you read today or that you heard in your country of origin or here that you don't understand? Here is the place where we can talk about it. Okay, so let's see, it's 4:42. Let me, I'm going to share with you a couple of my lesson plans. And again, I don't want to really get too involved in these lesson plans because that's not exactly, we don't have time for it. And this was supposed to be an hour class, but I think it's going to maybe be the full, well, we'll see. Okay, so I want to start with a typical 1 hour and 45-minute class, or a 2-hour class. I don't know what your class structures typically are. When I started off doing in-person tutoring, it was 2 hours with maybe 3 students or 2 students, something like that. But then when we went on to Zoom, and there was 20 students in my class, I was like, whoa. So I split them up into 2 separate classes, and I did it I did it a little differently. So this was one of the old original. This will be good if you teach a 2-hour class. Julia, can you see the lesson plan?
Yes.
Good. Okay, so this is obviously week 9 of my lesson plan. I'm teaching on Zoom. I have my materials. I have conversation cards, and conversation cards is something that I started out with, and that was, and again, it's included in the resources, questions and answers, or just questions that I could ask, you know, would you date someone who you just met? You know, just crazy questions that apply to your group. Here's your conversation. We're going to have a conversation for 40 minutes. As you can see here, there's the time frame that I'm spending. And the conversation is about books. What are you reading? Let's talk about literature. I say, please bring the title and author of your favorite book, translated into English to share. I found that every single one of my students were fantastic readers, and they all had wonderful books to share, and they wanted to talk about these books. So that was a really good class. And of course, I gave them this lesson plan a week in advance so that they could prepare. After that, we would typically do the idiom of the week, which was, in this case, to cost an arm and a leg. And that's, the idioms are always fun to explain, and we talk about that. And then, of course, I always added, give me the similar idiom in your own language, which some of them are hilarious. For the next 30 minutes, we did reading and comprehension. So I always included a little bit of reading. And in this particular case, it was, and this was a fabulous lesson, Residents' Unique Way of Speaking Sets Virginia's Tangier Island Apart. So basically we read an article, and I want to say it was from Newsella, which I'm sure you guys are all aware of by now. It's so heavily recommended among our community. If not, it's included in my resources, but that was a really good one that we did. And then listening, I pulled out a video of some of the islanders speaking. And if you asked me to comprehend what they were saying, I could not even do it. It was very confusing. And then, of course, we end with homework for next week, which is share your opinion. If you could, would you go to Mars? Okay, so that's a 2-hour class. And I also had materials. I had the map of Tangier Island, where it was located in relation to New Jersey, because it's actually very close, so they could travel down there if they wanted. And the Newsella article, which we would take turns reading. And I think that was it. So let me see, I'm going to close that one out. And then I have the shorter lessons. This one was a really good one. Let me share this with you. So this lesson plan is a totally different format than the previous. And again, I'm going to send these to you in case you want to use them, but basically, oops, I hear somebody. Basically, it was Thursday's conversation class. Somebody's sneaking in there. Can you please mute? Thanks. We did drinking culture. And basically, it was a class that we talked about tea, wine, beer, whiskey, coffee, water, lots of different drinks around the world. Down bottom here, there was a link. I'm not going to actually go to it, but it was drink like a local. And it was, this picture does not coincide with this link, but basically it was what was popular around the world. So if you go to Peru, it's the pisco sour. If you go to Russia, my Russian student said vodka. You know, actually, he just drank tea and coffee. Right, Julia? With a little vodka in it.
It depends.
A lot of tea drinkers throughout the world, so I included this picture. And then basically, this class structure was description and storytelling. Name and describe your favorite drink and tell a story about it. And that's basically what we did in this class. And that did take a full hour. Drinking culture is interesting because when you say drinking culture in the United States, I think you immediately think of alcohol. And that's just so limiting because the second you know, and I'm sure so many of you know this from all your travels and being well educated, the second you step outside of the United States, people have, you know, drinking cultures of all different kinds of things. You know, my favorite drink in the world is Turkish coffee, or you know, the green teas, specifically Moroccan green tea with the mint in it. So we talked a lot about that. Okay, so those were the lesson plans. And again, that's how the classes were structured. Real quick, what I want to do before we do a mock debate, we're gonna unmute some of you and we're going to do a mock debate. I want to just give you my general rules of a conversation moderator. And again, I'm doing a lot of repeating. You're moderating the class, you're not teaching it, because you want it to be very casual and very like, hey, we're all in this together. So you want to present a topic quickly and clearly, and then you turn the floor over. You want them to talk. So if somebody asks a question, and of course they're asking you, they want you to answer. They want to hear it in English. That's the easiest way. And that's the most direct way of them getting the response that they want. However, you have to give the question to somebody else and say, you know, you answer it, you know, and let them communicate with each other. Allow your students to talk, ask questions, complete sentences without interruption. Now, I know Rebecca, when she was in training, this was a couple years ago, said we don't interrupt the student. I don't know if this rule has changed or not, but what I typically do is, if we're in conversation, and if any of you are language learners of a different language, and you're in conversation or practicing your language with someone else, even if they interrupt you and say, it wasn't that word, it was this word, you immediately lose your flow. And then you're just kind of like, oh, and you want to go into grammar mode. You want to avoid that and don't correct. What I typically do is I put the corrected word or the corrected, you know, grammar problem or issue in the chat. They can see it later when they download the chat. Again, type all your answers in chat so others can clearly understand, especially hard to understand terms or words. A lot of the students will come with words that they're translating into something that maybe you don't even understand. So you have to ask them, can you please describe what you're talking about so that we can have it in the chat? We need to see that word sometimes because just hearing it isn't enough. So I do like to rely on the chat. Point T, point T. I said gentle control, help students who are talkers wrap up or say what they want to say in under a minute. So we all have this problem as teachers and tutors of ESL and English literacy. You always have one or two students that they will want to talk and talk and talk and talk. And sometimes that ends up controlling the conversation. And the other students will immediately lose interest. So of course, the gentle way of doing that is to either break it with humor and say, bup, 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 you know, like 1 minute, keep it to 1 minute, or stay on topic, because usually that's what happens. They go off topic. But it's really very important. I've actually watched teachers allow students to do this, and I've also seen teachers stop it. And it's inevitably the teachers that stop it that tend to have a better flow of the class. And it just keeps it much more, it keeps you much more on track. Correct pronunciation during readings, not during conversation. Again, I don't correct any pronunciation unless they're asking me to, unless they're like, whatever, trying to figure out how to pronounce something. Verbal cues, smiles, and thumbs up. And I'm sure you've learned this in every single one of your Zoom lessons, probably at the beginning of the pandemic and during the middle, but it's really, really important, since we don't have that in-person ability to look at somebody, look at their facial features, use our gut instinct to know if somebody can understand or can't understand. We need to look at our students, and we also need to give cues to our students so that they understand that they're understood. So I typically go like this, and I do it dramatically, okay? Because sometimes my thumb could be hidden by my name here. I don't know if you can see my name. It's hidden here, or people will be like, yep, over here, I'm good. No, right here by the face. You're doing a great job. Or nope, that was incorrect. This one I try not to use that much. But smiles and yes, that's great, like things like that, definitely help to inspire more conversation. I know I can tell you right now, it's the people who are smiling at me that are encouraging me to talk more. And that could probably be a bad thing if this were a back and forth. Okay, so, and lastly, always give homework. And I know it's totally goes against everything you're learning right now. If you have children in school, that homework is just horrible. I think older students and students of English as a second language, they like homework, because what they want to do is they want to come to class and be able to converse. They want those vocabulary words already in their head. And sometimes when you prep them and you give them that opportunity to do the homework, or they know what the topic is going to be, they are able to come to class more confident, more comfortable. And not only that, but they're learning the vocabulary words at home when they're writing them down, and then they're able to apply what they've learned in actual conversation. And I tend to go to my Spanish learning the subjunctive. I don't know if anybody has ever learned the Spanish subjunctive, but I learned it years ago. I forgot it. Now I'm learning it again. And it's like, I know it on paper. It's so easy for me on paper, but how do I then use it in conversation? Practice, 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 practice. Okay, so that is it for the actual structure of the classes. I want to move to exercises and resources for conversation. I want to do a mock debate, and I don't know how this is going to turn out, but that's half the joy of conversation classes. Sometimes you don't know if this is going to work or not. So let's see, what I want to do is open this link first. I'm going to expand my Zoom so I can see more of you. And let's see here. Share screen. Oh, wait, let me just give you, hold on, before I share screen, let me just give you the rules of this debate. So what I'm going to do, we're going to stay muted, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to divide you in half. And the easiest way to do that is if your last name begins between A and M, you are going to be pro this argument. And if your last name begins with an N to Z, you will be con, you will be against, okay? Whether you're for or against this, topic or not, this is the way it's going to go. And then I'm going to ask for 2 volunteers. Anybody want to volunteer here? 2 volunteers, just raise your hand if you're going to volunteer. Julia, do you see anybody volunteering? Because
No.
I'm really good with calling people out. Okay, I've got Lynn Snyder. So I'm going to ask you to unmute Lynn. And okay, we got Peggy. Peggy, rename.
Okay, but I'll have to make myself Peggy Mitchell, my maiden name, since Lynn is a Snyder.
Okay, it says Peggy rename on your.
Oh, I meant to put Peggy Redmond. Okay, that I don't spell it well.
So we're working with Lynn Snyder and Peggy. Okay, so you are first up to debate, and the debate rules are: you've got once we go over the topic, we're going to talk about the. I'm going to give you the topic, and we're going to read the pros. We're going to read the cons, and then whatever side you're on. Hopefully, you're both not on pro or con.
No.
Who's pro?
Wait, you said that the people whose last names began with the letter up to M were pro.
Okay, so Mitchell is pro, and then Snyder is con. Okay, is against. Okay, so and then you've got literally 1 minute to argue your case for or against, and then the rest of us are going to vote on who wins. Okay, so this should be hopefully this should be fun. Let's share the screen. And here's our topic. I tried my hardest to pick the most neutral topic. The website I use is by Britannica, and it's procon.org. It's fabulous, and they give you, obviously more issues. You can take a look at your leisure anytime. I decided to choose binge watching. Hopefully, we all know what binge watching is. At least Peggy and Lynn have to know what binge watching is.
I'm an expert, so I'm.
Yeah, good.
Are you a pro or a con expert? I need to know this ahead of time.
So I will have my students read the beginning here. We're not going to read it right now, but the first, this describes binge watching. And of course, at this point, almost everybody knows what binge watching is. So I gave the information. And then here you can see, is binge watching good for you? So that's the question that is presented. Is binge watching good for you? So your very first pro. So I guess it's Peggy who's pro. Can you please read just the headline for me? The first one?
Binge watching establishes beneficial social connections.
Exactly. So I read that, and then we talk a little bit about that. The act of binging content fosters a sense of community, unless, of course, you're watching alone. Okay. And then Lynn, can you please read con number 1?
Binge watching leads to mental health issues.
Ooh, yeah. A University of Texas study found that binge watchers were more likely to be depressed, lonely, and have less self-control. That's troublesome. I don't know what that's about. We're going to find out. Number 2, Peggy.
Binge watching has health benefits, like stress relief.
Okay. Con number 2, Lynn.
Binge watching can cause serious physical health problems.
Okay, sitting for a long time. Pro number 3.
Binge watching makes a show more fulfilling.
Makes a show more fulfilling. I would definitely say that there's a sense of immediate gratification. Like I can watch till the end. Go ahead, Lynn.
Binge watching makes the show less fulfilling.
Less fulfilling. A study found that people who watched multiple episodes of a show in one sitting reported significantly less show enjoyment. Okay, so I don't know if Peggy or Lynn need a minute to read more, or you have your arguments pretty much formulated.
We can pretend I do. I mean,
Okay.
it'll be less boring than watching me read for a minute. So,
Okay, I'm going to turn off the screen to stop sharing. We good? Or do you want to go back to reading? Good?
I'm okay. I don't know about Lynn, but
Yeah, I'm gonna wing it.
I thought you said I'm going to win. That's
Win, yeah, both. Okay.
Okay. So let's do, since Peggy raised her hands first, I'm going to give you a minute. Let's see, Julia, any chance you can clock a minute for me?
I could do it on my phone. Let me see.
Now, of course, all right. Go ahead, Peggy.
We all know what binge watching is. It's looking at a show, all the episodes of a show at once. It's a great way to spend your time during the coronavirus when we're all stuck in the house. And it's also a great way to learn what's going on in a show. One of the things that's good about it is you can get to know the characters in the show really well. You can predict what they're going to do in the next circumstance because you haven't forgotten the details of them when you see the next episode. And it's a great thing when you've done this binge watching to call your sister and see if she's watching along with you. You can make that a conversation in a friendship where some people maybe don't know quite what to say to each other. This is something you can talk about. Used to be we could gather at the water cooler. I mean, that's a famous place, right, to talk about things. But the water coolers have disappeared. We're not allowed to share cups. So nowadays we can get together and talk about the shows we've seen together. And binge watching allows us not just to share these things and to make these social connections, but it also can help you relax. When you've had a long day of typing and typing and typing and your neck hurts and your shoulders hurt.
Hey, Peggy.
The end.
Your time is up. Very
Okay.
good. Very good. Very good. So Peggy talked about being able to predict the characters. You don't have to wait until next week. You have more details at the ready. So by the time you get to the next episode, it's right there. You're far more involved. And she talked about gathering at the water cooler, that it's very social. You can not only watch it by yourself, but you can watch it along with your friends. And then you can obviously talk about it afterwards. Okay, so those were some of Peggy's points. Lynn, it's your turn. Let me see. Julia, set the clock.
Ready?
Go.
Okay. Binge watching creates a sense of non-reality. You get sucked into an environment that a lot of times you compare your own life to, whether it's something very happy, something depressing. A lot of times you walk away from it with not able to disengage from the relationship that you have with the story, with the characters. And from a health perspective, binge watching is it's what you're not supposed to be doing. You're not supposed to be watching a screen for a long period of time. You're not supposed to be sitting for a long period of time. A lot of times when we binge watch, we also munch. So we're combining lots of bad habits all in one period of time. And that's it. Okay.
Very good, very good. All right, so Lynn talked about the non-reality of watching episode after episode after episode. You get sucked into a reality that's not your own. That was kind of a very spooky beginning, but I was definitely drawn in. It can depress you, and you can become disengaged with the real world if you're always living in these shows, she said. From a health perspective, she mentioned, you're not supposed to be sitting for a long time, right? You're going to be eating, munching while you're sitting there, and you're constantly, at the disposal of bad habits, Lynn said. So both gave their argument. Both had a tone that was very assured, or maybe not so assured. So now when we vote, you want to think of all the ways in which Lynn communicated her point and Peggy communicated her point. Okay, we want to be very aware of our students and the way they presented their argument. So let's see. Let's take a vote. All in favor of Peggy, raise your hand. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Julia, help me out here. Honestly, some people are blocked. Okay. All right. Now, all in favor of Lynn? You got some votes, Lynn, but I don't think you won. I think Peggy won. I think, if anything, maybe you're like me and Peggy, that you like to binge watch and are not a victim of the bad habits. Anyway, that's an example of a very, very abbreviated example. Of course, I would go through all the students, give every student a fair shot. Let me stop sharing this. Hold on one second. Yeah. But that's an example of how one of our conversation classes has worked in the past. So to wrap up, we discussed Zoom and how to present yourself as a moderator. We talked about the 6 structures. We talked about some recommendations that I had. And of course, we did our mock debate. And I think I'm pretty much finished. I've wrapped up, and I've, I see that there's a lot of activity in the chat. And so I'm going to open it up to questions. And I think Julia is going to help me out here.
Okay, first question is, how do you save a chat and where does it save to?
Okay, so in your Zoom settings, if you have your own account, that is, and you go to your Zoom settings, you can click on one of the chat features that says allow participants to save chat. Okay, so you want to be able to go to your Zoom account settings to find that. The other thing that I do sometimes when I realize that maybe I have turned that setting off, or I don't have it active at the moment, is I will copy and paste it myself, and then I will I will copy it myself, and then I'll paste it into an email for all of my students. That's the cheaters version, and it comes out the same way.
Today, you can click on, at the bottom of chat, there's a little icon for file, and beside that there are 3 dots. If you click on the 3 dots, it allows you to save chat.
There you go.
Okay. Next question is, are the students level 4 and 5 in your class?
I don't understand the level 4 and 5. I do basic, intermediate, and advanced. So I have intermediate students.
I would say it's level 4 to 6 in your.
Yeah, 4 to 6.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, my students have a very good command of the language. They're able to They know past, present, future tenses. They're able to communicate fairly well. Some of them are very, very quiet though. So it takes a lot to pull them out.
Okay, there's some question about your picture. Why do you think the Trump cartoon didn't work for your students?
Oh, again, that's a good one. I'm going to say that they were probably pretty confused that an egg could be a prostitute. Honestly, I really don't know. In fact, I'll probably end up asking because they didn't understand.
So I am, as a Russian, understand it first, but it's funny.
So wait, you don't understand it?
First, I didn't, but after I should think about it a little, and yes, it's fine.
Yeah, good point, Julia. Yeah, what I did do with that cartoon was I sent it to them, because sometimes if they analyze the cartoon for long enough, some of them, most of them can figure it out.
Yes. So next question, how do you decide when to use each technique? Do you cycle through 1 to 6?
Yes and no. I use each of my techniques. I try to rotate as much as possible because I don't want to get bored by using one technique. I don't want the students to get bored using one technique. But there's certain ones that come up in every class. Question and answers comes up in class every time. Listening tends to come up in class every time. When I probably do a debate once a month, and that keeps that format fresh.
Okay, there's next question. I'd like to know how to get or keep a conversation going if the students are not speaking up.
Yeah, that's a very big problem. And I have two students who are very, very quiet. One of them has a great understanding of the language, but she doesn't like to speak. So I do not hesitate to call on students. And I think this puts them on the spot, and yet for some reason they keep coming back, so they're not that afraid. But again, I rely on the 5 W's. That is your standby. If you have a quiet student, fall back on, well, who did it? Well, why? Well, what for? How did it happen? And try to coax them out of their shell by using who, what, why, when, where, blah, 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 how. Go ahead, Julia.
Okay, there was some question about one-on-one conversation. Do you have any tips for this?
I'm sorry, I don't understand the question.
Conversation not in group and one-on-one.
Oh, group conversation versus one-on-one. So actually, one of my students, I think, left my class because he was not able to speak enough. Like I said, I had 20 students in one, then I divided the class in 2 to 10. If you're in a group setting, it's very, very difficult for every student to speak. Each student only gets maybe 6 full minutes to speak. So the less you have in your group, the better. But once I lost the student, I realized what value I wish I was able to give him. And I was thinking of instead doing one-on-one with some of my students. I tend to like small groups better, but one-on-one is perfectly fine. You take all of those same structures and you apply them to that one person. Like let's you and me have a debate, Julia. Like, what do you think about binge watching? Like, let's go. And you do that in a group too. I hope I answered that question.
I cannot find this question, but it was one about beginner students. how you will do it with beginners?
Yeah, I thought long and hard about beginners. And again, I go back to my very quiet students. Beginner students are a little bit more difficult. You literally just have to change your pace. Obviously, I'm speaking very fast to all of you because you're English speakers, you understand. When I am teaching my conversation class, I speak slower. I repeat my words all the time. I repeat them, right? I repeat them. When you talk or when you're conversing with beginners, you just take that and you narrow it down and you make it even smaller. Your vocabulary, keep it in the present tense or present and past. Use simpler vocabulary. Remember that conversation is basic. How are you? What are you wearing? I like chocolate ice cream. You can look online at questions and apply anything to a beginner, intermediate, and advanced. I've got to say though, it's a lot easier when you're working with more advanced students.
There's some question about debate. You summarized each person's talk. Do they each time?
Yes, I typically do. If I am in a class with 6 students, 10 students, whatever, if I have the time, I will summarize because again, I want them to listen. And sometimes when the English language speakers are speaking, they may not have the pronunciation available for other students to understand. So I repeat and I repeat so that they're able to vote on who wins and who doesn't.
How do you handle a student that you cannot always understand? That you cannot understand?
Yeah, that's a really tough question. It depends. Sometimes that student ends up dropping out because they don't feel understood or they don't feel like as if they're in the right level. If water always seeks its own level. And so when you get a conversation class and like all of these people are talking and this one person isn't, I will definitely try to focus on that person and draw them out. And please pronounce again. Please pronounce again. Write it in the chat. Maybe I'm not understanding you. Say it a little bit, say it in a different way. Then this way they try to, that they know that they're wanted in the class. They know that they're valued, but that I am having a little bit of trouble understanding them and that maybe others are also. That's the best I can do.
Okay, before we will continue, I just would like to ask everyone to fill out the evaluation form. You can find the link, workshops, and presenter's name in the chat box. And there's no more question, but if anyone wants to unmute themselves and maybe share something or ask question, please feel free to do it.
Yeah, I have a question.
Hi, Vani.
So, hi. Great session so far. I learned a lot. One of my students, she says that while conversing, and I noticed this, she makes a lot of mistakes. And when I ask her to think, slow down, and say those sentences again, she's able to correct those mistakes. But she says she finds it too much to remember the grammar, the vocabulary, the sentence structure while conversing. So any strategies to put all this together other than I just tell her to slow down, take a deep breath, don't be in a hurry, but any other strategies?
Bonnie, I think you're doing the absolute best thing possible because in that situation, typically what's happening is her mind is thinking so much faster than her words can get out. And the two need to be aligned in order for conversation to happen naturally and so that whoever's listening can understand. And I know for me, I have to slow down my thinking sometimes. I have to slow down my speech. The other thing that I find that's very, very useful in situations like that is to talk with a pen in your hand and to always have like something to rely on, because however you grew up learning, sometimes is a crutch, meaning like you use this as a crutch to help. And when I'm thinking, for example, in Spanish of the subjunctive, go back to this darn subjunctive again, I stop, I think, slow down, and I'll do, quiero que blah, 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 right? And sometimes that helps a little bit, but I think you're doing the best thing by just insisting that she need to slow down, or he need to slow down. He needs to slow down.
Anyone else?
There was a question that just popped up in the chat.
Can we have the material, please?
Yes. So here, let me open up my chat here. I do not know. Julia, you have all the materials?
Yes, I will type my email in the chat box. You can email me if you would like to.
Okay.
I will send it to you.
The other thing is I'm going to try to put the agenda in the chat and see if you guys can't capture it there. Give me 1 second. Of course, I just lost it. Mm-hmm. All right, where is this? Where is this thing? Okay, so I'm going to try to put the agenda. Oops. Let's see if this worked. Nope. One more try. Let me try to do this. Recording view. Yeah, what I typically do when I share resources is I send by email. So I'm going to put my email in the chat also. And for anyone who wants copies of the lesson plans, the agenda for today, I thought that there was one spot where you can get all those. If you cannot, somebody's saying there is. There is? Can you unmute yourself and let me know?
There's the document section in the Whova app that I think you should be able to move it to, no?
No, we cannot.
Oh.
Now, unfortunately, yeah.
That would explain this problem then. Okay.
Yeah, sorry about that. There's my email. Oops. Everyone.
Very nice that Tracy used her email, but I think it will be a lot of work for you. So I will ask everyone to email me, but feel free to email.
Well, I'm just sitting in Spain right now with nothing to do for the next couple of days. So
oh, okay.
Feel free. Anyway, it was really wonderful seeing everyone. I hope that this class was helpful. Again, if you have any questions in the future, you do now have my email address. Feel free to email me or Julia. And I look forward to meeting or seeing you, and good luck with all of your students.
Thank you. It was wonderful. Thank you.
And again,
Fantastic. Thank you, Tracy.
Great.
Yep.
Thank
please
you.
Thanks so
take a
much,
minute.
Tracy.
Take a minute to complete evaluation form, please.
Thank you so much.
Have a great night in
Welcome.
Spain.